Hello, I'm Sidney Porter from the Health Physics Society History Committee, and it's my distinct pleasure to be interviewing one of our most distinguished and influential health physicists of today, and that's Dr. John Frazier. John has so many associations with the Health Physics Society, I almost don't know where to begin. So maybe it's better to begin with your early education and how you led into health physics, John. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you, Sid. Yes, I was actually born in the southwestern part of the state of Virginia, and youngest of 4 children, and graduated from high school, from Gate City High School. I went to Berea College, interested in physics, and in fact I majored in physics at Berea College. During my time at Berea College, I was asked to do a laboratory during my sophomore year. I was about 19 years old. And the laboratory was on radiation detection and measurement. And that sort of hooked me on the subject of one aspect of health physics, certainly.
Okay, and so you were in physics at this point. And so when you graduated college, what happened next?
Well, during my time at Berea, I was trying to determine what the next step would be in terms of whether to go to graduate school or get a job in physics. We had a symposium there, and of past Berea College graduates, and there were several of the Berea College graduates who were very active in health physics and the Health Physics Society. One of those was John Frazier, Dr. John Frazier, and also Dr. Sam Hurst, and several others in health physics too. And they came back to the symposium, and at that time I think I was a junior at Berea, and they really got me more interested in the subject. And during my senior year, I was married at the time, and needing financial assistance in graduate school. And the Atomic Energy Commission at that time had the Health Physics Fellowship Program in health physics. A very good program. And so I applied for that. That was in 1969. I applied for it because I graduated in 1970. So I was looking for that graduate school opportunity, and the availability of the fellowship, the support financially from that was really a factor that led me to go into the graduate studies in health physics. And then I started at the University of Tennessee that summer after I graduated, and I was drafted before I could actually get started in the fellowship. I was drafted, this was in 1970, and served in the Army for almost 2 years. And then when I got out of the Army, I realized though that the fellowship program had ended, and which was a sort of a shock to a lot of folks in health physics at the time, but to me especially. But they saved me 1 year of the fellowship, so I had my first and last year of the fellowship. I guess it was actually the last person to start the Atomic Energy Commission Fellowship program, and that was in 1972, and got my PhD degree at the University of Tennessee.
And what was your specialty?
Low energy electron interactions with large molecules. Research was at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and that's one of the reasons I actually chose the University of Tennessee. Oak Ridge National Laboratory is well known for their health physics research over the years, and did research there with Dr. Lucas Christoforou on my dissertation title was low energy electron interactions with large molecules and with the fluorobenzenes and biphenyl, which are pretty good molecules to work with anyway. Along the way, though, I was taking the health physics curriculum at the University of Tennessee, and a 1-year course that I had was by what I consider one of the great influences on my life was Mr. Myron Fair.
Oh, yes.
He was a contemporary of Elda Anderson. I never knew Dr. Anderson, but Mr. Fair was one of my teachers for that 1-year course in Introductory Health Physics my first year in graduate school. And just an excellent teacher, very organized. I consider him a very strong influence on me continuing in health physics. But that was, those years went through, seemed like fairly fast, and completed the PhD there at Tennessee. And then I'm looking for a job.
Right, what happened then?
Well, it was like, where are you going to go? And I had a call from, actually I sent an inquiry into the Bureau of Radiological Health in Rockville, Maryland. Did you work for BRH?
No, I was a consultant with them.
Consultant,
but I never worked for them.
You had some ties there.
John Goforth I've known for years and years.
Right. And actually I went to work at BRH in 1977.
John was still head of it then.
Yes, oh sure. Didn't see very much of him, but he was a pretty busy man, and I was certainly an entry-level person coming in there. But after about 6 months, I was put, instead of a health physicist, I was put in charge of the instrument calibration section, I guess it was, and division branches and sections, and worked with Tom Oldhaber and Tom Lee in that group. Roger Schneider was in that group too, and they're on Twinbrook Parkway.
I remember the facility.
Actually was in charge of that for about a year and a half, I guess, maybe 2 years, I guess, something like that. And then we moved from there, though, we moved back to Tennessee, and I went and took a job with Oak Ridge Associated Universities in Oak Ridge. But during the time I was at BRH, the influences there continued with the interest in radiation detection and measurement, but also became interested in thermoluminescent dosimetry. We supported the TLD measurements for the Food and Drug Administration program, breast examination nationwide trend, the BENT program. And I was responsible for the instrument calibration facility for the FDA's X-ray machine inspection instruments, but also responsible for the TLD facility for the BENT support, BENT program. And that was another spark of interest in TLDs.
Did you all do your own TLD reading?
Yes, we prepared the TLDs, actually selected the TLDs for similar sensitivity, prepared them, read them out, and we used the Harshaw hot gas readers at the time.
At the old 3-chip badge?
Well, actually, this particular badge we were using in BENT was 4 chips that were arranged so that they didn't shadow each other, and in between was an aluminum filter so that when this was placed in the mammography beam, you could get a good representation of the dose to the breast.
So it was essentially, you designed it as a low-energy X-ray dosimeter.
Absolutely. I didn't design it, but I used
It
that
was
system.
designed.
It was designed that way and used in that fashion. I actually have the cards, the little cardboard cards with the holes on there. I save all kinds of whatnots, and that's one of the things I've saved from that program. It's a good experience.
It's a very important program, by the way, and a leader. It was the first one of that kind.
Yes, that program was, I think, instrumental in identifying some, with hard numbers, identifying some overexposures, or not overexposures, but high doses that were unnecessary. We also had a program near the end of the time I was there where we did, I was provided a dosimetry support for a CAT scan study, or a CT machine study, computerized tomography study. And that was an interesting program. I think we did like 20 or 25 machines in a 3-week period or something. The crew that went out and did these measurements. And it's pointing out what the doses, actually measuring the radiation doses during that time. While at BRH, I was able to interact and work with some of the folks at National Bureau of Standards, which it was called at that time. Greta Ehrlich and Chris Soares.
Of course, Greta was the mother, if you will, of film badges.
Yes.
And I think taught all the health physicists of that era about what good dosimetry practices were. She was an incredible person and so willing to share her knowledge.
Absolutely, and just I thought a good teacher in that regard. Interesting personality, too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, she was tough if you made mistakes.
That's right. But she had, as one of her, the persons, I guess, for whom she was a mentor was Chris Soares, who was really coming on strong with the TLD study. And she was good, knowledgeable as TLDs early on in that process. But that sort of got my interest in TLDs and the overall concept of external dosimetry. So shifting from the active instruments and measurements from radiation detection and measurement instruments to the passive integrating devices, TLDs. And I was actually interested in TLDs before I was in film. But by the way, I came into the field that way.
But you were also close there to NRL. Did you ever know Herb Addix and work with her?
I did not.
Addix and Shulman discovered the process.
Right. I did not, but my professor, the actually head of the physics department at Berea College, worked with the NRL folks on various dosimetry out there. Dr. Thomas Strickland worked with those folks.
And he was very instrumental in interesting you in the dosimetry field, I guess.
In the overall radiation measurement and detection and measurement process at Berea College. And Then Byron Fair and his overall health physics interest there during graduate school, the work at BRH and the type of opportunities there. And then moving back to Oak Ridge, or to the Knoxville area, Knoxville, Tennessee area. I took that job with Oak Ridge Associated Universities in 1980.
And what were your duties there?
Yes, there was I think after Byron Fair as the first mentor, the second key health physicist in my life was Roger Cloutier. I worked with Roger Cloutier at Oak Ridge Associated Universities for 6 years, from 1980 to 86. And I coordinated the health physics training programs there, and literally taught thousands of individuals, everything from high school students, college students, graduate students, to professionals through our professional training program.
And when did you take your board? Was it in that time period?
That's a good question. I had learned the physics and health physics through various, certainly the courses at the University of Tennessee in my graduate study, but my degree at the University of Tennessee was in physics. With the health physics emphasis, you would divide the different tracks there when you went for your PhD in physics. But the degree is actually in physics, and I learned a lot of health physics, but it was when I was teaching health physics at Oak Ridge Associated Universities that I was able to bring together the materials and a better understanding. And so in 1981, was the first year I was with the time requirements for being able to take the certification exam. I did take both parts of the certification exam. Thought it was extremely difficult, but I passed both parts that year. So this is it's my 21st year of being a certified health physicist, and that was to me an important part, a very very important part of professional development was the certification process and going through that.
Yeah, I think it's one of the better things that the society has done to set that up and to make that an important part of professional health physics. There's no doubt about it.
You know, I was actually, as you mentioned that important part of it, the flash in my mind was Mike Turpelak. Mike Turpelak, I guess with his past Navy background, but he was actually working at the Bureau of Radiological Health, and he was the lead person in the certification process in the early years of the ABHP, American Board of Health Physics certification process. And I remember that and his intensity of making sure that this process was working going along. And then, of course, it evolved onto the broadening of the American Board of Health Physics and then the American Academy of Health Physics, too, the role that they have for our
Mike was a very important part of that whole process and contributed greatly to it. And I take it that he had a little bit to do with the fact that you took your boards eventually?
Well, I sense from observing him and other certified health physicists at Oak Ridge and the degree of professionalism that they had seemed to boost them up and enliven them to do as much as they could in the profession, those certified health physicists. And I encouraged, while I was at Oral, I encouraged the students that came through that program to go for certification. Certainly there are some people who have decided not to, and I think it's a very good demonstration of one's broad interest and broad expertise in a number of areas.
I think it also, to a large extent, teaches you a bit about what you don't know, which is very important in this field, because it's such a broad field.
Yes.
Now, you've had so many areas that you've delved, you've delved into. When did you have your first committee job with the society itself?
That was, I believe, 1981. I was asked to serve on the summer school committee. I had not been on any committees, and trying to remember if I joined the society in 1980. Must have been 80, I guess. But I had not served on any committees, and I volunteered to serve on whatever committee would be there. But since I was in education at Oak Ridge Associated Universities, perhaps something to do with education and training would match up with my interest. And so I believe it was, I can't remember the president that appointed me to a committee, asked me to serve on a committee. I served on that committee for one term, and I believe I was the chair of the committee the last year that I was on that 3-year term. We worked very hard to ensure that we had good summer schools for the society, and I started looking back and to see when the first summer school was, which was in 1978, just a few years before I went on the committee. And since then, over the years, I've maintained a file on each of the summer schools and provided that a copy of that to the archives at the University of Tennessee. I still keep files on, not as extensive as I was when I was on the committee. And I did serve a second term on the summer school committee back in the late 80s.
You've been on many committees between now and then, though.
Well, some. Certainly the summer school committee was an important one. I've been on some advisory groups and some ad hoc committee type interactions of various things for the society.
And then you went on the board when?
Right. I was started to say that I was asked to run for the board, and I didn't really know all the requirements or expectations for a director of the society. So checked that out, read the rule regarding that, and agreed to serve if elected. And I was elected. I'm trying to remember the year now. It was must have been in the late 80s, and I served a 3-year term on the board.
Huge amount of work.
Well, it's a lot of work, but it must have been in the 90s, come to think of that, because when I went on the board, Paul Roller was the president elect at the time, and he selected me, or asked me if I would serve on the finance committee. The finance committee has 1 or 2 directors on that committee, depending on which year it is, and I agreed to serve on that. So I had a 3-year term on the finance committee while a director of the society. Now, I mentioned the name there that I don't want to get over. Don't want to pass by here, because at the time I was working at Oak Ridge Associated Universities, one of the individuals that was working with the survey program and then came over to work with the training group was Dr. Paul Frame. And Paul is very active currently in the history committee and the activities of the society in various ways. But Dr. Frame is, although younger than me, I consider a mentor in many ways, because he has provided some sound advice and guidance to me on various topics over the years.
Very bright person.
Oh, yes. I worked with him for the time just before I left Oral, and he came on to take over the program there, subsequently to train the group there. But I still interact with him very much, and that was an important individual in my life, too. Now, in 1986, I had been doing professional training, as I said, for lots and lots of courses, everything from 1-week courses to 10-week courses, which was an important program that was funded by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission Office of State Programs. And we trained many of the state employees, regulatory group employees. That was a 10-week course, and it was cut to a 5-week course. And during that time, I was doing courses after courses after courses, and I wanted to broaden my experience, and so I started consulting in 1984 with Dr. John Frazier, who I'd known as a Brick College graduate many years before me. And
one of our distinguished presidents of the society.
Past president of the society, and I believe the recipient of the Founders Award over the years.
And the L.D. Anderson Award.
And the second recipient of the L.D. Anderson Award, and started working with him in 1986. I actually 84 as a consultant, and then went full-time with him in 1986 at a group together in Oak Ridge in Oxford. And still work with him, with the group we have. But that's a long time of work with him. And I consider him also that mentor with the key ones I mentioned of Myron Fair and Roger Cloutier and John Frazier. Where we are, whatever we are able to get in our lives, we owe it to those who have guided us and supported us and directed us.
Absolutely.
And challenged us to do as much as we can and do the right thing each time. And I was fortunate enough to, in 1988, to be certainly just a great honor to be selected as the L.D. Anderson
Award. Yes.
That was in '88, and that was in Boston. Still have just very vivid memories of that opportunity there, and it's very. To me, it was an emotional time too, of the recognition of hard work, but also by your peers and by those who are the senior members of society recognizing you.
And in many ways, I think it probably is the most distinguished award that the society gives, if not the most distinguished award, because it's given to a young person who has most of his career ahead of him yet, as saying this is a person that has made his mark early but will continue to.
Well, I've compared the whatever accomplishments I had up until 1988. I've compared those with the previous and subsequent Elder Anderson Award winners, and I'm amazed at the extent of their accomplishments. There are some, most every one of those has just a list of great accomplishments, and continue to. Almost all the Elder Anderson Award winners continue to be active in the society in leadership roles and support roles of the society and in the profession. Just world-class leaders.
Absolutely, and you are too, by the way.
Well, thanks. I was surprised about this interview because I thought it was going to be for the older members of the society, and I'm 53, so I told the board yesterday, I said, I don't think I'm old enough for this, and they said, well, you may die tomorrow, so you better go.
Well, we like to get people that are leaders in our society, and I think that's as important as the age. But as one gets older, then of course people drift away and we lose the opportunity. So that's why I put a lot of emphasis on getting the older members. But we're just as interested in getting the contributing members. And you're certainly that, John, to say the least. Now tell us a little bit more about your last tour of duty on the board, so to speak.
Well, I was on the board of directors on the finance committee. I became interested in the overall management of the society and continuity of the society and consistency of the society and ways we could do things better. I was asked to run for treasurer, and I was elected as treasurer and served as a 3-year term for the LC. Treasurer elected for 1 year and then 2 years as treasurer, that term. And during that time, I became even more aware of the condition of the society and the profession, but also some of the needs of the profession and individuals as we look around the meetings and chapter meetings and things like that. And I was off the board then I'll finish my completed term as treasurer. I was off for a year, and Dr. Genevieve Reshler called me up and said, I'd really like you to consider running for president-elect. And I really had to think about that and pray about that because you're talking a real time commitment. I agreed to have my name submitted, put on the ballot, and was fortunate enough to be elected. And so during this year as president-elect, I've been traveling through chapters. I think right now I've visited 18 chapters. And
a lot of work.
A lot of work, the preparation of the chapter visits, but it's an immensely valuable opportunity to find out from members face to face what are their concerns, what's their current work situation, what they're pleased with, what they're not pleased with the profession and the society, and how that the officers and directors of the society can help those members. I have a pretty busy schedule coming up in March, and April, and May. But March and April are the 2 busy months, and I will, by the time the annual meeting comes around, I should have finished probably about 44 of the chapters, or 48 chapters, and it'll be about 44 of those, I think, if everything goes well and scheduling goes. One of the considerations that's been presented is that I think we need to discuss this because it's an issue before us, and in the future, people may look back and say, how was that important? But one of the issues is whether or not the president-elect has to go to each of the chapters or whether others can go on the president-elect's behalf. And that has been discussed for many years because it's a consideration for someone who thinks they might run for president-elect.
But doesn't feel he has the time to visit 40-some chapters.
Exactly. And one of the things that we have already established is a relationship between the directors and the chapters. Each of the directors has assigned, I think, about 5 or 6 chapters.
Which is a wonderful idea. Is that working now, John?
It varies somewhat. We're going to the next level and encouraging the directors to actually meet with all of those chapters each year, or if not all of them, the ones they're assigned. And we've tried to give them geographic areas where they can meet with those chapters. We've got a couple of exceptions where that we had to assign the director to some chapters that are remote from their location, but we'll see how that goes along. And this concept may be broadened with the next two presidents, or the next president, one after that, depending upon how it goes with this current situation. But that's an important, I think, activity that the directors can perform for the president-elect on behalf of the president.
Well, I think that, the society has to grow with the times. And I think you've chosen one of the things that probably has kept us from having some good candidates in the past. And the point is to make our society available to more people. And that includes the board of directors available to more people and the top officials. So that's it's a very important issue. Don, you brought some photographs with you and some memorabilia. You want to tell us about those?
Well,
is this a good time to?
I didn't bring all the things I wanted to. In fact, I forgot the one item I really wanted to bring is a membership handbook from 1958. It's a very small handbook. It's probably 3 by 5 or something like that. And I did not have it in my materials when I came, but certainly there are things that would have been in that handbook that would be useful. I will try to get that to you in the future, perhaps for some other discussion with some of the folks who are actually listed in there, those members in 1958.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
For instance, as I was meeting with the Cincinnati Society, which is a society that was formed before the Health Physics Society, Dr. Gene Sanger was at the meeting, and I looked up his address in there, and he was at the meeting, and I read out his address out of that membership handbook. It was 1958, I guess it was handbook. And he said, yes, I live right there. And that relationship, you can look and see who was in the society and active in the society at that time.
Well, I wanted to get a tape of Gene. As you know, he's failing now, sadly, and I'm not so sure he's going to be coming to any more meetings. So.
Well, I think it'd certainly be worth going to see him.
But I think that's what I'm going to do is to go see Gene, because he's contributed so much to our society, and one of the few physicians that's been associated with our society for many years. There aren't that many. There are very few, as you know. That's
right. Dr. Sanger did come to that meeting this fall up in Cincinnati, and seemed to be in pretty good health. But as he told me there, he doesn't go to the meetings of the society or the annual or mid-year meetings.
And he missed the NCRP meeting last year for the first time in 30 years.
Which brings me to the NCRP, and on behalf of the society, I certainly have a strong desire that the NCRP prosper and grow.
Absolutely.
Certainly, this NCRP is encountering financial difficulties, as many in the profession are finding, as well as other groups are finding. And certainly, as we look at this glimpse of in history now, in time now, I would certainly hope that the NCRP can continue and can strive and can thrive and prosper with the funding of the recommendations as well as the reports. I rely on those. I have them on my shelf and use those daily.
The NCRP and the ICRP reports are both absolute fundamental texts that every active health physicist needs to have, and not just synopsis. I'm talking about to have a report, to go back, and to use this as a basis for the reports that an active health physicist turns out. And as a person that does a lot of litigation work, you understand the legal necessity for doing this.
You mentioned that. That is an aspect of my professional life that I never thought I would get into. And in 1986, Dr. John Frazier was providing expert witness testimony on behalf of different organizations and individuals.
As John has for many years.
As he has for many years. Back in the late 80s. He asked me in 1986 to consider assisting on a workman's compensation case. And I said, Dr. Frazier, I don't really feel comfortable doing this because I'm not sure that I'm up to the task, or whether that I could even do the job, And plus, it's like being a showman. He said, no. He said, you're just telling the science. And I went to Greenville, South Carolina, for a workman's compensation hearing, and I heard one of the early leaders of the Health Physics Society make some statements that I thought were misleading to the hearing commission. And I came back and I told John Frazier, I said, I'll go back over there if I have to walk, because I felt it was essential and important that the true science be presented, the accurate science be presented. And at that very moment, I shifted from being a expert witness to be a teacher of the court, or teacher of the hearing commissioners.
Which was so important.
Right. And that is the role that I see it, and I continue to do actually quite a bit of litigation support, either as a consulting expert or a testifying expert. I have found it to be rewarding as a teacher, because you first teach the attorneys with whom you work, and then in some cases you're teaching the judge directly. But you end up teaching the attorneys on the other side. But more importantly, for a jury trial, you're teaching the jurors. And I treat it that way, and we've been very successful. We've been very successful in doing that. In fact, the very recent case I testified in last past November, one of the jurors said that I was the best teacher that they had ever had in the debriefing of the jury. Of course, some of the other jurors weren't so nice, but I felt that as a real compliment. And that's what I strive for, and that is that teaching opportunity to share the real health physics information, because it's very understandable. And I see the jury as a member of the public, and our public education endeavors are so much in need of broadening and reaching more of the public on the basics of health physics. And that's certainly one of the areas that I'll be emphasizing during my term as president of the society next year.
Well, education, I think, is one of the most important products of health physics. Whether we're educating our peers, or whether we're educating the public, or the courts, or technical people that are misinformed for one reason or another. And since radiation has a stigma associated with it, sadly, the problem of education is an immense one. And I think one that the society, even so it's worked at it for a lot of years, is not particularly successful at it, sadly.
You know what, there's a group, an element of that population that needs education that the society has been very successful on in recent years. And that has been the congressional staff. The Health Physics Society started a congressional relations program about 7 or 8 years ago. And that program has evolved into I think, a very focused, very cost-controlled method of interacting with Congress and congressional staff, because letting the congressional staff know, because those are the ones who are making sure that different parts of bills are included, making them aware of what the profession of health physics is and what is the truth, if you will, about each of these health physics areas, or these radiation protection areas, radiation safety areas, radiation sources, and the considerations for protection of the public and the environment from radiation sources. That program is strong and moving along. And what I'm striving for, as well as the rest of the society leadership, is consistency with that word that we present. Certainly, the message we're trying to put out is that the Health Physics Society is a trusted source of sound scientific information, and that this society can be called upon to provide that aid and assistance.
Well, I hope it's a difficult task, to say the least. But of course, it's wonderful that we've had this congressional outreach, and that it's being continued. One of the things that I think probably needs a lot more work, and I hope you agree with me, is the chapters having outreaches to local people. For many, we have a lot of chapters, but I don't see that many outreach programs that seem to make a difference.
Well, during my chapter visits this year, and for still the ones to come, my theme has been the education of the roles and opportunities that each member, that each chapter can have in this area, on programs that are sponsored by the society but are implemented by individuals and by chapters. One of those programs is the Science Teachers Workshop.
Which has worked very well.
Works very well. We also have a real request for good materials on general public education, brochures about and fact sheets about radiation, what it is, biological effects, what we know and what we don't know, and that information that can be used in speaker forums, as well as handout materials and brochures to be used in interacting with various public groups. We went through our one of the strategic planning sessions yesterday morning, and one of the areas that stood out in terms of educating the public through the chapters was preparing and distributing information and training to the chapter members and to the chapters, and then training them on these presentations to the public. These are all areas that we'll be looking at in the near future to broaden that program. Of course, we're fighting a hard battle because there's so much misinformation that's given in the major media because it's sensational. It sounds great. Basically, the theme for many years has been radiation is that monster on the hill, and it's going to come down and get you. There are elements of the population, though, that really understand that the facts that we live in a sea of radiation. We always have. Natural background radiation is a part of our lives and has been. That the additional contributions by human activities is relatively minimal compared to the natural background levels. And I think there's a greater appreciation of that than most of us realize. And I see that and I interact with public meetings and speak at public meetings in different parts of the country on behalf of different clients. I see that that's a teaching opportunity, but many of those folks there already know the basics of that. They just want to know how much is this additional contribution from this operation of this facility.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, what do you see as in the future, after your term is over, what do you see for the society as the major issues, other than the very important education one that you just talked about? Well, what are the other issues that the society as a whole faces now that are going to require a lot of work?
I guess the big issue is the declining use of radioactive materials in research, in agricultural applications, industrial applications, and the decreased use to an extent of radiation-emitting devices in many applications. I certainly see an increase in the medical applications, but in the other areas for which we had a need for health physics support, health physics coverage, I really see a decrease in that. In some cases, because the perceived regulatory burden, keeping up with all of this, receiving materials, tracking materials, disposal of materials, and because of that decrease in use, I see a decreasing need for health physicists, because if we're not working with radiation sources, then the need drops away. I think that one of the things we can do as individuals and as a society can point out that there are beneficial uses of radiation and radioactive materials. We shouldn't forget that. And that we should be using those sources for ways that would benefit society. And that we should look to ways to expand the use of that, while keeping in mind that we're trying to keep doses as low as reasonably achievable, certainly. But let's not go away from the use of radioactive materials and radiation sources, because certainly those are, in some cases, there's no more sensitive way of doing a tracer study than with radioactive materials for an agricultural experiment or for some other type of application of there. Certainly, I see that as decreasing. I see we need to work to keep that from decreasing. Another thing I see is that's a real challenge to the profession and to our members of the society, is that there are radiation protection activities being performed by individuals who aren't really qualified to do the work. And that whole problem, for a number of reasons, financial. In other words, the employer said, well, I can get a less expensive person to do this work, or just the fact that the work scope is not so broad that it requires a full-time person, so they will give the assignment to a chemist or a biologist or a technician and maybe industrial hygiene technician.
Actually, I see industrial hygienists more and more being given a collateral duty that they're not really trained for. And yet, usually they're well-trained industrial hygiene. And I also see the Industrial Hygiene Society is still growing. And it's continued to grow for the 40 years that I've belonged to it. And I see our society as having plateaued off and maybe even decreasing a little bit. And I also see the industrial hygienists as taking on more and more non-ionizing radiation duties and being trained for them. And so there's a little bit of an overlap there that has got to be a concern for the board, I would imagine.
Well, certainly our emphasis since the society was formed was for ionizing radiation sources, whether it be radioactive materials or the radiation emitting devices.
Mm-hmm.